Hi, my name is Benedict. This is a mix walkthrough. It's been a little while since a mix walkthrough. A couple of reasons. One, I've been fairly busy with client work, especially the higher hertz reviews, which take quite a bit of time, and other client work, and of course getting Jake Cropley's record at Undone, the launch, and all of that kind of stuff takes a bit of to get there. But he got there and it's gone brilliantly. The other reason is that I've been looking for material that's not sort of the same. And I was aware that one of the things I was really missing was straight rock, what people these days almost disparagingly call classic rock. And rock is the center of everything that we do. It doesn't matter whether we're EDM or disco or whatever. It's a subset of rock. And it's so hard to get. And I was chatting to one Nigel Nisbet in a group, and we had a little bit of backwards and forwards about our paths in this career, and then when I put forward a request saying, seeing we're talking rock, is there something that I can mix? He said, hey, look, give me a bit, and then he turned up with a couple of tracks from a record that he's just about to put out. And was quite open about me doing another mix. Nigel's taken over the mixing duties himself. He's actually a bassist and guitarist. And before we go much further, for those of you who are in the know, you might recognise the name from Electracy, I think it was pronounced, a Britpop band who were doing pretty okay for themselves in Britain, including managing to get on the Glastonbury bill in the very late 90s. Of course, that was a real challenge to be a Britpop band around that time because of that band that began with O, with the Punchy Brothers. But nonetheless, the boys did okay for themselves, got themselves in some movies and did a lot of touring. So good on them, and Nigel is one of those fellows. Ultimate Cool actually predates that band, and it's down to just Nigel and a guitarist called Charlie. Don't know Charlie's last name, but nonetheless there's that collection all round. And in case you're wondering, yes, there is. I hear some more material coming from Electracy. I would obviously be eager to hear that as well. The first stuff that I heard from Nigel was from another band. He seems to have bands everywhere, which I thought was just wonderful material, wonderfully sung, but I didn't dig the mixes. And that's part of how we got to talk about mixing, and that Nigel was trying to get better at mixing himself. So he jumped at the chance to see inside a track that he's mixed himself from somebody else mixing as well. So we might as well dig in and start to have a look. The track is called Self-Destruction, with some dubious spelling, as probably is appropriate, and it goes a little like this. We'll start with the existing mix. And swap. Now, this is not meant to be a my mix is better than. I think that there are some really good things about Nigel's mix, but there are some things that I wanted to realise differently. That's the whole idea of this show, this series, is to do creative mixes to deliver something differently, to show how different could be achieved. I will say, however, that Nigel's mix, to get parity with mine, I had to drop by 4 dB. If I allow those extra 4 dB up, this probably sort of seems cool, but you're also probably going to hear that it's going to be slammed by the program limiting, like the limiting for this whole show. It's extremely loud. If you're watching the meters, actually, which you couldn't see, we've not got a lot of headroom there. It's sitting at maybe -8 dB on the crest factor, and I far rather see about 12. I know loud has been the thing, but at least personally, I'd rather have a lot more dynamic in a track than it just be over loud. There are records like, say, Judas Priest's Firepower that I always pick on for just being too loud. I have a nasty feeling I might feel that way with this over time. Plus, of course, if you are worrying about Spotify, loudness penalties and what have you, it's just going to get penalised. Whether that's a problem, I don't know. You've got to work that one out yourselves. But I just don't love a overloud mix. So at roughly parity, so we've got a noticeable timbral difference. When Nigel's gone very bright and forward, I've gone for a lot warmer. Nigel's got his vocal very forward, which I'm often accused of being too forward. In this case, I wanted to let that drop back and to allow the grunt of this music to really come forward and dominate there. Again, neither right nor wrong, just different sorts of approaches. I guess that's probably it, so might as well go and play the whole song. This is Ultimate Cool, Self-Destruction. This is my new mix of the material. Alrighty, Ultimate Cool, Self-Destruction. I like it. It's a great track to get when looking for rock. I don't know what the intent was in the writing of it, whether they set out to achieve a particular sort of sound or style, but I think it's great. I put aside all concept of what it might, could, should be as I started, so I went into the setup, so we might as well talk about now. So obviously we have the tracks, which I put in, and we might as well see that all in, because I don't remember the function buttons. Popped in all the tracks, they're all good. And then arrange them. The big thing for me is making sure that I've got my my mixing board set up right. I minimize most of the things because that's done in the rack, which is here. in Reason. So I'm just running through for those of you who are not familiar with Reason, and it's somewhat different approach to things. So I close down a lot of this because I'd rather do it where I can see than be using these an awful lot. The EQ is used, but that's used through a window, which allows us to see what's going on. And it's that visibility that I love in Reason more than anything else. I will be honest, you will notice a certain amount of flickering on screen. Update bug fix 12.2.5 has added more bugs. Not pleased, Reason. But overall, everything still works, if not with some issues, including some constant pop-ups about errors that really aren't a problem. But moving forward, so everything was popped into sections, into buses, and then the main working bus, which is sent to a clone of itself over here, meaning that I don't use these for mixing per se, but I use them to arrange what I'm doing. So if I want to work only on guitars, I can either solo here or there, or more likely I can just take a couple of these faders and pull them back. So I'm giving myself a solo in place sort of a situation here, which I like. So I can say, okay, I'm just going to drop these by 12 dB so I can work on my vocal while still having the rest of the material in the mix, but not dominant, because I'm always very cautious about working in pure or hard solo, which I will do much more on talk through like this than I will necessarily do in the real world. Tracks were all good, they were all clean and tidy and arranged. I did rename some things simply because when they came across to me, the naming didn't fit in here to allow me to know what was going on. It seems like a typical guitarist, he's named his guitar tracks for the guitar, necessarily more than what the function is, but I got there easy enough. It wasn't too much of a drama. Vocals, again, just had to rename so that I could bring their function forward so it was easier to see which one I was dealing with. Vocals were recorded in two groups or sections. So we have the verse and the chorus. We'll just increase these in size a little bit. So we've got the verse and its double, and then the chorus and its double, separated out from each other. What his plan was there in that, I'm not sure, whether that was just how he recorded them, kind of like breaking them up to make it easier. Wouldn't surprise me if the singer hadn't coughed a few times in the recording of this. Maybe that's just his voice. It's a cool vocal. I really do think it's cool. But it did immediately lend to the idea of, if I process these slightly separately from each other, normally I will have the lead vocal for the whole thing on the one track, and then once we get into chorus, if the act is got their stuff together, then that's where they'll be bringing in extra backings and things like that to help provide the lift. But because this was here, I thought, well, that makes it really easy to say I might approach slightly different sounds between the two. So starting with vocals, I decided, okay, I'm going to give this verse, the verses, it's almost sort of really rough Loverboy kind of a feel. And then when we got to the chorus, then I kind of did the more obvious and said, okay, let's give this a Lemmy feel. Now, in no way does this sound like Loverboy, nor does it sound like Motorhead, but there are enough similarities that I wanted to go down that path. You will possibly notice that my vocal is more reverby, echoey. It's just a thing. This is what I do. It's how I mix. I like to bring out the beauty. I tried pulling that back, but I did not like the sound that I got. I felt like it was small. And while the way I've mixed the vocals in the end sort of recede, I made that part of the thing so that they're kind of small but very, very driven in their own way, which gives this intensity because we've got the juggernaut of the track itself. So everything's laid out. I've got my reference track, so his original mix. Now, I don't spend time A-Bing. It's not my job to clone his mix. That's just not my form, and nor do I ever bring in, like I've mentioned, Loverboy or Motorhead. I do that out of my memories of these, my feelings of these. In no way will I ever bring the Motorhead track in and put it inside my mix and constantly A-B until it sounds exactly the same, because then I'm not mixing this song. I raise that not with any sense of that what Nigel may or may not be doing, but because it's come up a few times in discussions, in groups, and some people think it's the coolest thing, smartest thing ever. To me, it's the most unwise thing, because I'm mixing this track. I'm mixing Ultimate Cool Self-Destruction. If I were mixing Motorhead and I was told, oh, we want this to seem more like Ace of Spades, then I could possibly see why. But still, if they're hiring me to mix, I'm working on the assumption that they've listened to who I am and what I do, and are wanting some of that, in which case I'm going to mix what I've got to the feel that I think makes it fire. We can only ever work as ourselves. Trying to work as somebody else is always super unwise. So where I say Loverboy, Motorhead, it's just that feel of having listened to those songs on the radio. And there's something about this that reminds me of that, the intensity of it, the fun of it. Because despite Motorhead always seeming scary, there was something incredibly comical about them as a band. And they were aware of that, like their song with Girl School is just so hilarious. It's really very, very fun. So we will start the way I started up. Now, once everything's set up, then I looked into Reverb. Now, I used, and we're going to want to split our screen a little bit, 2 reverbs. We'll get to the reverb sections. Both of these reverbs are hand-built by myself. Now, I don't use them because I built them because I want to use them. There's a little bit of a distinction. If we take our vocal, let's just take our lead. This is where it gets a little hard with one screen. Let's take our solo here, and we'll turn off both of these reverbs. Actually, I better get a point where we have, yep, we've got vocal happening here. Although, actually, no, sorry, I will go with here.
Driving in my motor car, past the speed of sound, going fast, going down. Driving in my motor car, you want that high? Hit your brain, the end.
I will turn off. I'll leave the leveling in for the moment, but I'll turn off the delay just so you're hearing the reverb.
Driving in my motor car, past the speed of sound, going fast, going down. Driving in my motor car, you want that?
It's the first one that I brought in. It was like, I want this to be the big space, and I want it to feel big stadium size. It's a coarse reverb. It's got 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 taps in it. So it's what people might call early reflections, but it's deliberately rough.
The end is nigh. Driving in my motor car, past the speed of sound, going fast, going down.
Then EQ'd. I used the roll-off here because I preferred the sound of the roll-off here to the roll-off here. Well, I used some of this to narrow it, to make it seem like it was coming back from further away.
Driving in my motor car, you want that high? Hit your brain, the end is nigh.
Boosted the bottom end a little bit whilst rolling off quite a lot of it as well. So boosting there at 85 and rolling off at 50. So we're getting a little bit more whoomp, but we're not getting a little down below the murk. I have pulled out quite a bit at 500 because I don't want this to end up seeming too thick, despite the fact that it's a dark, thick-ish reverb. Put a little bit of a boost in, just under 3 to help push that forward.
Driving in my motor car, past the speed of sound, going fast, going
So that's
down.
one reverb.
Driving in my motor car, you want that high?
The other reverb
Hit your brain, the end is nigh.
is really just the early, and it's almost acting like a little chorus. So that's really up close, and a little like if you're in a bathroom. It's very close, and it just adds shine and gloss to everything. Everything in the mix is sent to this. Everything is sent to both of these, because it's, as I always say, it's really important that this song happens in one place, that when the listener listens to it, they don't hear 47 different instruments all trying to say, look at me, look at me, look at me, all over the place, that there be this sense of one. And so this is all about that and everything going into these. So,
driving in my motor car, past the speed sound, going fast, going down, driving in my motor.
So thickness, richness, shine there, and our sense of bigger space, bouncing back, kind of like a stadium. I'm not suggesting this is being performed live in that way, but it's just giving that big feeling, because this is a big track. Even though elements of it are kind of small, overall the track has to come across feeling huge in its own special kind of a way. So that's our reverb space, and that's the first thing that's done. And mostly I will do that with just the lead vocal, so that it's comfortable, and I say, yep, that's the sound space that I want that to be in. We'll then check to make sure that that is working across the music. Little less of these on the rhythm section because we don't want them to drown. But we can hear that that's adding something, a big sense of space. The echo is quite pronounced on this, and that's deliberate. Again, that's like that slap back that's coming back out of a big stadium, or if you're out on the road, this image of, like that photo of the road, kind of like the Priest album, with mountains in the background. So there's going to be quite a late slap back, and that's all built into that reverb space. There is something on the drums as well. So that gets us the space that we want. Now move into actually processing the vocals. So I start with the verse lead. This is it. This is how I begin to design the whole sound.
Going down, driving in my motor car, you want that high? Hit your brain, the end is nigh. Driving in my motor car.
Here is my raw vocal.
Going fast, going down, driving in my motor car, you want.
It has that reverb on it, so I'm pushing into that reverb right from the beginning. So everything I do is going to be working in this space. And it's a case of saying, well, okay, what do I want to do with this? I've obviously got to raise its level overall. A lot of things were recorded, possibly even DAW speak a little quiet, but there's nothing wrong with them. They're all good, clean, tidy recordings. So no argument whether Nigel's working on some sort of -18 dB rule or whatever. That's his thing. It's not actually caused any problems. So then I bring in this.
The end is nigh. Driving in my motor car, past the speed sound.
There are some funny little imperfections in this vocal, particularly the lead. I'm not sure why they're there, whether they're from comping, editing, I don't know, but they don't cause a problem in the long run. So as soon as we've got the double and the mix in, we don't notice that there seem to be some little glitches or dropouts.
Going down.
My aim here was, normally I wouldn't compress this hard, but as I was sort of starting to work on this and go, okay, let's get a little bit of a sense of its timing, that over heavy compression, or more compression than I would normally use, I felt really gave a lot of punch and grunt to this. It's an unusual voice, but at least in this instance works really, really nicely. But I wanted her to bring out the grit, the dirt in the man, to make him seem less like a guy wearing a nice shirt, more like a guy wearing a dirty t-shirt and dirty jeans. Again, that sort of early Loverboy, and I don't know whether Loverboy ever sounded like this, but just that feel of Loverboy before the shinier production, before the synthesizers. I love the synthesizers. Kind of feel. That's what I sort of wanted here, and that pushing into the limiter here, or the compressor.
Hit your brain, the end is nigh. Driving in my motor car, past the speed sound, going fast.
Hear how that gives a almost strangling kind of quality.
Going down.
And that makes, in a sense, it makes him sound smaller, but it also makes him sound more driven. There is a bit of drive that comes in on this. That's one of the reasons I love this ADHD. It adds a really nice drive to things. And there's a fairly long release so that we get that as he tries to push forward. So that feeling of, and I talked about this in another walkthrough for vocals, I think that was Jake's medicine, about not wanting to make him sound like he was behind bars. But in this, I kind of want him to feel like he's trying to push against these bars the whole time. So that worked really, really quickly and easily.
Driving in my motor car, you want that high? Hit your brain.
Delays, modulated delays are a big part of what I do.
The end is nigh.
This one was tricky to get and was overdone in mix and overdone in time. I started with a much longer time, which sounded great, but by the time I'd got to the finished mix, it just started to sound too swimmy. I still really liked it, but I knew that people were going to go, that's too swimmy. So not only did I halve the amount of time, but I reduced the mix a bit as well. But this helps give not only more richness to his voice, it gives some smoothness and everything. This device, again, one of my own, adds a very nice, almost unique sounding drive. It has this funny way of brightening in this really nice way.
Going down.
Tiny little bit of stereoness to the echo, quite a bit of modulation.
You want that high? Hit your brain, the end is nigh. Driving in my motor car, past the speed sound, going fast.
So that's pushing into that reverb, which makes the reverb richer. You don't hear the reverb so much, but you're aware that it's there, and this echo lifts that voice and fills it out, and therefore I'm super pleased with that sound. The thing that we have next is there's a double. So the verse has its lead and then a double. The chorus has the same.
Going down, driving in my motor car.
Normally I don't distort vocals. Benedict is not a vocal distorter. But I had a device that I was playing around with and I got a result that I actually rather liked out of this. I wasn't expecting to use it, but because it's a device that's not going to stay in my arsenal, I switched across to Scream, doing something quite similar. If we pull everything out,
Driving in my motor car, past the speed of sound, going fast.
there's some drive coming in on the beginning, so that's some sort of distortion clipping, something or other on the beginning of this, and there's actually a bit crusher, so using a little bit of bit crushing to really give a distressed feeling to this voice, which pulls out the grit, the roughness of the throat, the rips in his clothes, the dirt everywhere.
Going down, driving in my motor car, you want that high?
A little bit of finesse on the
The
EQ,
end is nigh. Driving in my motor car.
and I put him through a cabinet emulator, so like he's coming out of a speaker. I did start with this right up here.
Sound, going fast.
While it sounds cool, the problem was that once it got into the mix, it became too dominant. It was hard for me to actually find where it was. I kept worrying about other things, but it was actually just that kind of push in the EQ, but a little bit of it works nicely. I then needed to add a delay because we've got to separate these two. We're not pushing them together, we need to separate them. So the delay here is significantly longer, but it's quite a long way back in the mix. I did have it higher and I liked it, but again it just started to cause problems, and there would have been that feeling of, oh, it's too It's too echoey, Benedict, which I get frustrated with hearing, in part because that decision is a modern one. Modern mixes can be prone to being awfully, horribly, creepily dry. I'm not trying to show off echo, but I like to build a big sense of space. This is actually patched into the feedback loop, and it doesn't do a lot because our echo is so quiet. Initially I had it, actually I'll show you how I had it. Initially it was here.
Motorcar, past the speed sound, going fast, going down.
It was actually a little shorter in its times.
Hit your brain, the end is nigh. Driving in my motorcar.
But we just seemed to have too many issues with regards to... I better go back, undo until we get to the spot where that needs to be. No, it's not going to do it. Maybe because it doesn't really know how to put it back. But this, rather than being wired like you would in a normal situation, it's wired in a breakout like this. So it's taking the reverb, sorry, the delay, the echo, and then doing that Haas thing to it. So it makes those echoes come quite a way out. And that's a pretty nice thing. Even though you barely hear this echo, that again builds that sense of distance, of space. So either like a stadium, or as I say, that idea of the road with our crazy driver and the mountains in the background providing this long slapback sound.
Hit your brain, the end is nigh. Driving in my motorcar, past the speed sound.
So it's not like we're supposed to necessarily consciously hear this double, but it adds a lot of body, and in this case, a lot of sense of drive, of urgency to this vocal, which is what I want. I want, once that vocal comes in, for there to be this strong sense of urgency. So... he has to really grab us by the feelies. And I think that does that in a way that's nice. And it also draws us in because the vocal seems a little behind the mix, but still very, very clear. We then got the same thing with the chorus. So let's move to our chorus, which is here. And this just straight away, this is when I suddenly thought, this reminds me of Lemmy.
Baby, I've been feeling my destruction, baby, and I'm reeling.
So approach was similar here. I did actually start with the leveling tool.
Baby. If you're feeling self-destruction, baby, like I'm seeing my destruction, baby.
Similar sort of thing of pushing him in hard, but I let the release be faster than before because it was about 500 milliseconds before, but a much higher ratio. So there's still that sense of I'm pushing this guy against something, because part of the thing, the feeling of this, the emotion of this kind of thing is I fought the law and the law won. That there are some things that it doesn't matter how hard you push against, you're always going to lose. And this guy knows that. This guy knows that because he says, I'm pushing for self-destruction. And so that's that wall that he is going to hit. It's kind of like Dave Edmunds crawling from the wreckage, only after an awful lot more little white pills. And so that's the beginning of the sound.
Baby, and I'm reeling. Bam, 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 baby.
I always knew that I wanted this to have a lot of belly around it. Initially, I had this after the compressor, but pushing delays into a compressor has a really, really cool sound. I commonly do it with guitars, where I'm amping guitars, but in this case I thought, you know what, I'm going to use that with the vocal. So rather than those echoes sort of seeming to be like this is not a garden of flowers. This is... So I decided to push this, create the echo sense,
If you're feeling self-destruction, baby,
so we don't have our limiter.
my destruction, baby, I've been feeling.
So this is almost like another reverb. It's a collection of taps. This is one I designed for higher hertz, if you hadn't worked that out. And then that is pushed
My
into...
destruction, baby, and I'm reeling. Bam, 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 baby.
I pulled the width back here because having those taps right out there, while it seems really clever, it reduces the punchiness, the muscularity of this. And this track has to feel muscular. Even though there is something weedy about our singer and his tone, it's very driven, it's very manly, it's very muscular. If we've got him out here, then it's just not going to deliver the same result. So we've pulled in these echoes so that they're working more in the middle rather than jaggling around out there, distracting us.
If you're feeling
Pleased with that sound. Then there's the chorus thing. Now I liked the drive that I put into the verse so much, I thought, let's have another go. And whilst setting up the bit crushing, I had transversed through this warp and gone, ooh, that sounds rather cool, but it wasn't what I wanted at the point. So I thought, okay, let's try it here.
seeing my destruction, baby, I've been feeling.
Now notice in these cases, I'm actually not using any kind of compressor. I am just using drive to... So a lot of the vocal sound that you're hearing in here, the lead, the forward bit is compressed, but the backing stuff is just hacked. And that's deliberate. I don't normally do that, but because I wanted such a sound, I thought, let's just use the drive, the clipping to do this for us.
And I'm reeling. Bam, 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 bam.
Again, put through an amp kind of sound. That's just a sort of a resonator, but does a nice job of emulating speakers. The B I've commonly used for sort of 50s Telecaster cowboy style. It's got a really nice sound and feel to it. So the digital warp, exactly how it works, I'm not sure, but it does have a nice sound in the right situation.
If you're feeling self-destruction, baby, like I'm seeing.
We've got a lot of rattly echoes coming in there. Now we bring in this, which is...
My destruction, baby, I've been feeling. My destruction, baby, and I'm reeling. Bam, 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 baby.
This is a pair of delays with the ability to offset the timing of one of them. So our right, it's a little later than the left, which helps focus over on the one side. Each of these vocals tends to have a tendency to focus a little more on one side than the other. And this then actually moves that delay. You don't really hear it, but it does create that bigger sense of space around this. There are then 3 more delays in here in this diffusion section, which are based upon this time, and a combination of those times. And the math is handled by the diffusion. So they're either very close together or they spread out. And the level's kept low because I don't want it to get too reverby. But we end up with...
If you're feeling self-destruction, baby, like I'm seeing. My destruction, baby.
So that's picking up some of that roughness of the drive, smoothing it out into this really coarse, dirty kind of throat, as well as giving us that great big sound stage.
I've been feeling my destruction, baby, and I'm reeling. Bam, 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 baby. If you're feeling self-destruction, baby, like I'm seeing.
So now if we contrast between, let's just turn off our solos, between our verse
Driving in my motor car, past the
notice that that vocal really sort of changes, it expands, it embiggens as it moves into the chorus. Now, a verse and chorus are really the same in both cases. There's almost like four choruses, or two, A, B, A, B. It's a very simple vocal, but it's very effective. And then as we go on, there are some backing vocal parts that come in. Originally, these were sent all in one stem. I said, "Oh, can I have them in separate?" I didn't actually end up loading his take of what he'd done with them. I loaded them in, had a listen to what they were, put them into a bus.
Baby, I've been reeling, baby, like I'm seeing, baby, I've been reeling.
And clearly they're done as a two-part thing. So I took them and I panned them out. So these two refrains are leaned more to one side or the other. So they ping-pong a little bit. Now in the first situation, that vocal actually is a little bit on the left. The other one, it's a little bit on the right. Not that I've balanced them that way, but that's how it's turned out, and I'm more than happy for them to do that, for vocals to lean a little bit, because it helps the instruments to work, and so this provides a little bit of counterpoint. When they come together, they're not super loud. I checked his, they're not super loud. It's not like this is a musical or something where we want the chorus to be super visible or audible. They're just built. So they're just a bit more. Part of me would like to bring them up, but I think they're better just back. So they're panned. So that was the first thing I did, was to work out their panning. Then how they were going to be processed. And I decided that seeing all the other backing stuff had been done with drives, I would try just clipping this. So I gave it quite a bit of push, clipped quite a lot. Little bit of softness, but not too much. You don't want to overdo softening. Not in this situation. It wanted to be. And the great thing with that is that we've got no sense of compression, artifacting, or anything. It's just, it's there. And it helps provide that sense of angst and urgency in a cool, aggressive sense, not that horrible, emo, whiny sort of a sense. And then, of course, it's echoes. I've gone big. And deliberately, it is not synced. You'll see I never sync, or virtually never sync, echoes. I've just found something that feels good. And by feels good, it may belong to some kind of timing. Maybe a quarter triplet or something or other. Don't know, don't care. I find that points where it's like, I like the way that bounces back. And I want them to be reasonably sort of warm and smooth. Though they just add that nice little bit of extra oomph to the whole procedure. So that's our vocal finished. Yeah, that drive in his throat, that feel there.
If you're feeling self-destruction, baby, like I'm seeing my destruction, baby, I've been feeling.
So he sounds tortured in a wonderful kind of a way. Again, not that sort of oh no, I'm having a feeling, emo sort of a way. It's very rock and roll. I like that. That's what rock and roll should do. So that's our vocals done. I moved from the vocals to the drums. So we'll pick our sections. So let's say from there to there. That covers most of our drum variation. And I pulled it down like this, just so you can see again how that works, but moved across to the drums. Drums are all separated out here, and I popped them in a bus. They came across as different parts. We're hearing the room reverbs. These are electronic drums, but they don't sound like it. And I've made sure they don't sound like it. Seeing I had the room mic and some overhead stuff, then I decided I would start there. I'm going to make this seem like it's kind of like 1978, 1979, and we're mixing that way. So I'm going to mix from the room in and say, okay, so I've got my sound there, and then I set up my effects. Yes, it's very reverby. I'm going, that's the room, the space that I want my drums to happen. Bringing these overheads. Let's go the other way. Now you'll notice this is actually flanging. Quite deliberate. Because these are electronic drums. I don't know what kit they are, don't care, but they are samples. And the last thing I want is for people to be listening to this thinking, oh, they're samples. I want people to be listening to this feeling, not so much that, oh, this is a clone of something from 1978, but to be feeling as though this could be 1978, that kind of rawness and energy, along with the beginnings of really nice production values. So pushing that in. And Nigel did a lot to bring up the treble. Personally, I wonder if he didn't over-treblify everything, but that's sort of a personal choice. I like a bright mix, but I wanted to keep his metal work a lot less pushed or splashed. Actually, I will turn off this. Forgive me, I have left this in the mix for the moment. I'm just going to pull that out because I want you to hear what I was building. Then you can hear how it grows. Hi-hats, snare. In terms of EQ, I've just pulled a little bit here on the kick. Snare I left alone. Mostly I left all of that stuff alone, which is my preference. And then done another similar sort of EQ thing, pulling out some of those mids. We don't want to kludge our mix, and that's a great way to decludge a mix, is to pull some of those, putting a little bit of snap on here. And because his metalwork wasn't super loud, which is fine, it's good, because often stuff comes across and it's just too loud and it's very hard to pull it back in the mix, then I've given a little bit of boost there. Listening alone, you hear that flange, but this is bringing quite a lot of level because the drums were quite quiet, so an A-B is very difficult. You hear how, yes, there's a level boost, but there's also a big sense of room in that drum. So now we've got this. I've imposed will on that, and you can hear that echo as it bounces back. So that adds a lot more sense of hugeness, vibrance to the drum kit. Combination of a little bit of drive. There may be some clipping happening on the end of this. Although if it is, it's very, very minor because our needle is not hitting the top. It wasn't my aim, I just wanted to embiggen things. I've left this very wide as it is, with a little bit of straight feedback and cross feedback, meaning the left goes to the right goes to the left. But I've allowed that to be wide because these drums aren't super wide, and I'm deliberately not using a lot out there, so I'm happy for them to use that space to come around, hoping that the treble uses it, which I think it does in a nice way. We already agreed that when the drums came across that they would be an audience perspective, which is, again, helpful if we're trying to capture that feel of real rock and roll at, say, 78, 79, because I don't think anything was ever done with a drummer perspective then. It just seemed like such an odd idea. I may be wrong, but I believe that things were just naturally done in audience perspective because it makes sense. When drummer perspective became a thing, I really don't know. I don't care as such, but I didn't hear about it even as a thing until a few years ago. So that's our drums. We've then got this. Nigel is a Rickenbacker fan. I'm a Rickenbacker fan. I don't own any Rickenbackers, but I'd kind of like to, even though it would be a total waste of the instrument because I can't play the damn thing. But this is and obviously lends itself to the Lemmy thing, what with him playing a Rickenbacker. But I love this. There's just something about the sound of a Rickenbacker and it's just hacking into this thing. Little bit of EQ, wanted to bring up the bass because, not because it needs a lot of bass, but I really just was looking for, let's boost this a little bit because there's a lot of tops, but I'm pushing the tops as well, and the aim there in that EQ is merely just to make it. I often make fairly small moves in EQ, looking more just to make a less even, a less flat kind of approach. So as the notes move, then suddenly this EQ means that we end up with a slightly different sort of feel. Delighted with that. And then it's how the pair of them work together. And they have to work together. They are, thankfully, performed really, really nice and tight, which is great. If this isn't tight, it falls apart. Bring in a little bit, only a little bit, of this Red Rock, which is a rack extension version of the Molot code. My favorite, probably just because it's the one that I've used the most, but between this and the actual TDR, I will pick this because I like it better and I'm more used to it as well. But the aim there is to emphasize the rhythm, but while that sounds cool, I also don't want to crush it. There's something very nice about the tone and the movement there. So, and then a little bit of tube here. The tube is designed to largely just to brighten things. Yes, we lose some of the punch on the kick, but it's more important to have that movement really visible. And then the rhythm section, again, just a little bit of EQ. Two things. One is I'm picking that point in the bass where I'm saying, okay, I want that. That's where I want it to be. I don't know the key scale of the song, but I've said, okay, that's where I want to sort of push through. So I'm creating the punch there, which happens to be, interestingly enough, where I chose to boost the bottom end of the reverb, if you remember. Because this tube is prone to making metalwork very, very bright, I've rolled off just a little on the top end. So we've got quite broad EQ. You can see they're narrowed down, quite broad EQ, just gently massaging the overall tone. Always looking to focus punch, snap, sizzle. That's it. I'm pleased with that, so I move on. And then what we've got left is the bit in the middle, the 6-string bit in the middle. And that's our guitars. Possibly a tiny bit quiet, but that's not a real problem. I started with... Oh, these are a little out of order. Let's get down to... Where are my guitars here? This one, because this is the one that really plays all the way through. These are already amped. I did no amping. You'll see that I've done nothing there. There's a little bit of EQing on these just to help pull things through in the way that I wanted, like that. So just pulling through our mids-up presence. But he's used his own real guitars and real amps as far as I'm aware, and it sounds great. So I started with this one and then brought in these ones, which have an accent there. And he's going for a relatively clean tone, but the combo here means that they add a good sort of thing. It'd be very tempting to do the Blink 182 kind of thing there, but we wouldn't get the same kind of rusty razor blade sort of feel that we get out of this. So this one was really just working with the bass. And as such, we're not really aware of it being there. And these are relatively low in the mix, the guitars. I didn't feel that they needed to be super loud. Because they add without being super loud. Obviously, their processing's off at the moment. So it built up the parts out of his performances. Basically goes along like that, and then it starts to get all kinds of interesting. And you'll see that I put in a little bit of panning. Our guitars are panned, not hard panned, deliberately not hard panned. It's I get so frustrated when I hear or see things in forums, "Thou must hard pan guitars." I listen to the mixes and they're just unpleasant. They're split and all over the place. Though I've got these at plus minus 50 either way, which clearly moves them out, but allows room, reverbs, echoes, what have you, to still come around the side. It keeps those guitars still centered enough to be muscular. Hard panning them makes them delicate. Is this what we want out of this? No. So if you go making them sound delicate by putting them right out there, like little things on the end of spindly wires, then you're going to have to work to try to compensate. And everything you do to try to compensate at that point is going to solve a problem that you caused and is probably going to make the mix sound pushed and therefore weird. And that's also, I think, part of the reason why so many modern mixes are just too loud to try to overcome the fact that they've made it spindly, not realizing that if they brought those guitars back into the center, they would sound meaner. We've got our solo. This guitar plays several different things over a while. It starts its run on the one side, travels to just past center, and then goes back. It does it slowly. But that constant moving helps that guitar solo to stay focused in the listener's mind, because we're designed, as I say over and over, we're designed to spot rabbits in the undergrowth. And the way we spot rabbits in the undergrowth is not by seeing rabbits, but by seeing rabbit movement. Once we see movement, then we can focus in on it. And so the movement, when we're lying in the bushes waiting for rabbits, it's the movement that alerts us to dinner. So by moving this guitar as it plays, even though it's subtle, it actually helps us to focus on that guitar, meaning that it doesn't need to be as loud. It's not that I want to bury the guitar, it's just if I make it too loud, then it starts to sound more like, a different kind of a band. Which, with the super loud guitar, that's cool. I don't know, maybe Toto, I'll just pick on them for no particular reason, but just that Toto and Motorhead would seem to be the opposites of each other. We still want that backing to seem so freight trainy, so juggernauty, and if our guitar goes really loud, our lead goes really loud, then it actually makes that start to seem small in comparison. And I don't want that. So movement helps. And there are a few little bits and pieces, and then there, here, we've got some harmonies. Beautiful. So very, very simple work on the guitars because I was really pleased overall with the tone. Just EQ to pull the presence forward, deciding where I want things to sit in space. That's mostly it. But because they are quiet, let's pop ourselves back here, I needed to pull them up. So this is a casual 12 dB to put them into the mix. That puts them in the mix. A little quiet, but again, absolutely nothing wrong with the recordings. They're not noisy, they're not problematic. I then wanted to bring them together. This is not an unusual move. I've put, again, a little bit of that tube on it with a slight asymmetry to give a little bit of bite and just brighten them up in here. So it adds a kind of a crunchy cut to the guitars overall. So it's a bit more than saturation, but it's not doing much in the way of drive. It's just adding this real presence to it. That really is all of the elements in. There was then some balancing backwards and forwards and spending some time going, how can I get this right? How can I get this right? That was really done at this level, making sure that the reverb really felt right. And eventually I got to that point where I thought, this is it.
Driving in my motor car, past the speed zone, going fast, going down. Driving in my motor car, you want that high, hit your brain, the end is nigh. If you feel it, self-destruction, baby, I can see it.
So our Rickenbacker and its clanking thing really drives proceedings. Drums emphasize that. The guitars build on top of that. And then this voice that, as I say, is kind of tortured, pushed back, but somehow really, really driven. So we build that feeling of this guy who is just pushing himself to destruction and has seen somebody, we assume maybe a girl, boy, goat, don't care, who he thinks is as destructive as him and wants them to go along for the ride with him so that they can drive themselves into a wall or off a cliff or whatever. Not that I'm giving this as life advice, probably not the best thing. Your parents wouldn't thank me. But it is perfect rock and roll. And then it's really nice dirty guitar solo. and it just rides and rides and rides. Some very cool sort of pulled off kinds of sounds, of quite rockabilly in reality. And then there's this very cool, I'm not sure when that sort of harmony stuff started to be done, but definitely 80s metal, British new wave heavy metal used a lot of that kind of octaving harmony kind of stuff, and is really nice because we're sort of driven, exciting. Another. And that which is just like winding us up. And that bit at the end is like the car's going for a tumble. We're like rolling over. The nice cool little bluesy, and then we're done. We're done for, but we're done. And I think it's a great song. It's really, really nice, tight, straight rock and roll. Really, really cool stuff. Took a bit to get that balance exactly the way that I wanted it in the end. I have not checked this anywhere else. I overnighted, came back in, made a few more adjustments this morning. Really only, I pulled a little bit of bass out of the kick drum, but really only to how those vocals were sitting, particularly with regards to these echoes. While I liked the beginning verse coming in with quite a bit of echo, I could see it getting kickback from people not being used to it, and it made it sort of seem perhaps a little too far away. If I were picking up a record from 78 to 82 or 3, I wouldn't think anything of it. I'd just be like, okay, yeah, that's cool. It's interesting. That's part of that sound. But I've also got to take into account today, so I've allowed that to be a little bit more forward, but nowhere near as dry as most people would mix it. I want that voice to be glossy and beautiful and sit in the mix that's sort of a little bit far back, like he's imprisoned, but at the same time got this absolute drive that once he comes in, he drives the piece, even though that Rickenbackers is clanking away like a bastard. But I largely left the chorus alone because I always liked it. As soon as that comes in, it's just like whomp. It really opens up, and like it or not, that's the way that I hear the song. Again, if you went back to the A-B, you'd hear quite a tone difference. Mine is a lot warmer and a lot less pushed. The highs and the mids I felt in the end were really very pushed, so I let that come back in mine to let the super cool drums and Rickenbacker really drive things, and to allow the voice to seem quite isolated, because somebody who's in this kind of frame is obviously feeling isolated from society in general and all that kind of stuff. Well, I hope you have enjoyed this. There's quite a lot to process, so to speak, in here. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the record. I don't know whether it's all as sort of as this, but that is a super fun track. The other thing that was sent over for me to consider mixing, and I would have been delighted too, was a cover of a prog band, which you kind of don't necessarily see with this, but then Lemmy was from a prog band before he threw all of that up for one chord and one string. And I would have liked to do it, but this is probably cooler to have done. But being a cover, even though it's an authorized cover, it doesn't necessarily mean that authorization is going to stop bots from pinging this video left, right, and center. And there's so much time and effort that goes into these, and I'm not going to allow it to be pinged for anything or anyone. So we had to say, hey, we'll bypass that. I think that's basically it. If you have questions about the process, then please ask on down below, and I guess keep an eye out for Ultimate Cool album If he shares that at the time, then I'll be happy enough to pop links down here as well. All that's left to say is have a great day.